It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, June 12th. Your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is doing a mock draft.
Yeah, I guess we have to.
Your Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Locked On Flyers podcast and making it your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You can find our show for free over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get the latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, as you are aware, we did this together. The Locked On NHL crew, all the hosts from around the Locked On NHL network here, did a mock draft for the first round. And it was a nail biter, I got to say. I was a little bit nervous that, our colleagues were going to snake the guys we wanted. I was pretty confident because I know, as we know, Russ is a prospect expert, and I like to think of myself as a prospect, very well-read person and understand everything, and have done a lot of research into a lot of these guys. So I felt pretty good about our preparation going into it. But I was nervous that we weren't going to get guys that we wanted. I think we really did. I think we were pretty successful. But let's talk a little bit about this mock draft, because it's a lot different than actual draft strategy and what we think the Flyers draft strategy is, right?
Yeah. I mean, but I'm still, believe it or not, I still kind of did it with the Flyers in mind, like what would fit best, because
Right.
we don't have a team. So I have to think of it, and I get it. You should probably take the person who is the best player. But I think when it came down to it, we did the right thing, because I think we did the right thing by the Flyers, but then we also did the right thing for organization building if it works out, I think. But both were really good choices. The ones we were toiling over are both really, really good choices.
Yeah, I'm really excited to bring that to you. We will tell you both first round picks. And I should say, for the second first round pick, the Florida pick, we assume the Panthers are winning the Stanley Cup and are
Right.
picking 32nd here. But, things could change, I guess.
Anything could happen, but so far it looks that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is kind of the groundwork there for our Locked On NHL mock draft. But as far as the Flyers pre-draft strategy, like, what is their plan, and how do they approach all the different permutations of the picks that could go before them?
Yeah, so I think their plan is they identify their player, whoever that player is, player X, and they see if player X is still available when they pick at 12. If player X gets taken 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11, then they look to see who falls, because that's where your most value is going to lie. And then when that happens, you'll see, like, just very much like when the Devils were deciding on Shane Wright or Simone Nemec, then you look and see who's next on your board. And your next on your board is not going to be who you think is going to be, 32nd. It's going to be other first rounders. So you're going to look at that and say, all right, now let's look at it and say, is it this? Is it that? Or does somebody else have something that's not on the board that we should talk about? And you don't get a lot of time, but you get what? I think it's 15 minutes in the first round, and then I think it's 5 minutes after that. So
I
it's
think
enough time.
so.
Yeah, I think it's enough time.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting because when a guy drops like Shane Wright, I think that that example is a prime example of somebody dropping because doubts are creeping in about him,
Hmm.
and then those doubts become contagious, and he
Hmm.
doesn't go until the Kraken pick, right?
Hmm.
And so I think there are some guys that drop because for whatever reason, teams have decided other people are their guy. And it's not that there's anything wrong with this one player that's dropping. It's that maybe these teams assumed he wouldn't be available and have now attached themselves to these other picks or whatnot. But I think trying to discern if a guy drops because there's genuine concern versus things are just weird, like how do you figure that out?
Well, like, as an example, like with Matvey Michkov, and he didn't drop because he was a bad player or they were worried about him. He dropped because they were just some teams just didn't want to deal with the Russian factor. And so if they had somebody else that they said, we don't have to worry about any of that. We're going to just go with this. And that's what happens because there's still some teams that don't really want to deal with it. And so that's how a really good player can go, to drop to that. But that's not indicative of, the kind of player or the skill level or anything else. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole sort, other things are injuries. Injuries will get someone to drop. Other things are things that just happen on the outside in life. And then they say, well, we don't want to deal with that. Let's just get somebody who doesn't have any of that attached to them. So
Right, like
those things,
baggage, you
yeah,
just don't want
those
it. Yeah.
things, those things get players to drop.
Yeah, and then there are, on the flip side, some guys that are very late fast risers in rankings that for whatever reason they were slightly lower, but in the week or two before the draft, all of a sudden everybody's talking about them and they go from maybe like a 12 to 13 pick to like an 8
Hmm.
overall or something like that. And like is it difficult like to not get caught up in that if you have a plan in place, or is it something that you do want to get caught up in it because maybe everybody's talking about them for a reason?
Well, you do want to get caught up in it if so as an example, like Beckett Seneke, we talked about how much he grew and
Hmm.
everything, right? So, that's a scout's dream. Like all of a sudden he's a power forward. Uh he's just learning how to be a power forward, but he is. The size says now he's a power forward. So, and even he said, hey, I used to look at Patrick Kane stuff. Now I'm looking at Philip Forsberg. So that just shows the difference now,
Right.
in his mind. So that's something that's exciting. And I think some teams now have moved him up a lot further because it's like, wow, now look at the potential pot at the end of the rainbow. It's changed from where we scouted him a year ago.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting case in terms of just a pure physical change
Right.
that could affect it. Now, if you had to give the Flyers like your biggest nuggets of wisdom going into this particular draft with this draft class, what would it be?
My thing is, this is a defensive rich draft. So I'm looking at defense first. But again, if a player that I think is a top 5 or 6 drops to 12, then I now have to debate defense against that player. And maybe it's foreshadowing. Maybe that's exactly what happened.
I was gonna say this sounds a little
But
familiar,
it's true because
but
it's exactly how it would play out.
no. I know exactly. I think that's really the point that we can't go into this having expectations for the Flyers that they will pick a defenseman first or they'll pick a forward first, defenseman second. Like any of these things that we've just talked about in terms of guys rising, guys falling, could leave the Flyers in a position where the best player available with the most skill that can help the Flyers may not be the position you think at
Right.
that time.
Right.
And they have to be prepared for that and not stick to picking a defenseman when, say, a top 5 or 6 player drops for
Right.
whatever reason. They have to really seriously think about it. You can still pick the defenseman, but you have to think about it
You
and
have
make
to
a
think about it
clear
because
decision.
yeah, because like those other teams, like the Devils said, "Hey, we're taking a defenseman. This is no slight on Shane Wright or anybody else. That was their thought. We just need a defenseman. If teams need a defenseman, they're going to take a defenseman. It doesn't matter who's on the
Yep.
board. Then, like, you don't have to take best player available. Sometimes you do have to look at your projections for your organization and figure out what's strong or not. And again, when you're taking these guys, just because you have a certain amount of guys today, you're talking about the top guys 2 to 3 years and then 3 to 5 after that. And so things change in 3 to 5 years. There's injuries, there's guys, maybe retire. There's depending on, the team. So a lot of things can change.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, getting to that mock draft, we are going to start with our 12th overall pick, assuming no trades have taken place in this mock draft. And we'll talk about who picked before us, who did they select, and then how did that lead us to our 12th overall pick. We're going to do that coming up next. The NBA and NHL finals are here, and it would be so amazing to be there in person. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting those tickets even faster and easier so you can make that dream come true. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. They've got killer last minute deals, views from your seat, and a lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying those coveted NBA final seats, MLB tickets in your town, and so much more. My favorite part of the app is that it's great for getting notified about last minute flash deals, and they let you save even more with zone deals where you pick a section and let Game Time choose the seat for you. Best of all, they have all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, and your tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so it is our favorite time of the year in a lot of ways. Russ, I know it is your favorite time of the year.
It is.
Definitely, because of your being a prospect expert. And, when we talk about draft eligible prospects, you tend to focus on the rankings and all of that, and not really the mock draft side of things as much. But we got to do it here on the Locked On NHL network, and ourselves and our colleagues from around the league in Locked On got together and did a mock draft. And we're looking at the 12th overall pick right now, assuming that no trades were made and the Flyers are locked in at picking in the 12 slot. And so we thought we would share what the 11 picks above us look like and then talk
Yeah.
through who we picked and why. And just so you have the context of who was already off the board here.
Right.
So let's take a look at what our colleagues from the network picked ahead of us here. We have the Sharks, of course, taking Celebrini. The Blackhawks went with Demidov. Locked On Ducks picked Lev Shunov. Columbus, I thought, interestingly, like Caden Lindstrom dropped to Columbus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is just that little bit of thing with his back, but otherwise he's a tremendous player.
Yeah, and then Tisha Gimla went at 5, which I think is much higher than I would have expected.
I know it could happen, so I'm not totally shocked. It's interesting it played out there.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that Locked On NHL Utah went with Zane Pareka instead of Zeev Bayou, who went later.
Yeah, I mean, Parekh, they're going with the points, and they're hoping that he's like this, just a tremendous offensive defenseman, and he could be. But there's a little bit of risk there with that. And I, there's no place on earth that I would ever pick Sam Dickinson ahead of Zeev Bouillon. I just have to tell you that it's just not in my universe.
No offense to our Locked On Sens friends there, but yeah, that was a perplexing pick to me as well, especially with Bayum still on the board. Like, to me, no brainer there, but they had a different idea. Maybe it's a proximity of London and Ottawa. They felt like they knew him better, but I don't know. And that was baffling to me. What was not baffling to me was Calgary taking Barclay Catton. I think that's a really good choice for the Flames.
It is. No, they got a great player there. I'm really high on Canton.
Yeah, and I was kind of bummed out that the Locked On Devils host took Cole Iserman,
Yeah, it's a good
snaking
pick.
him. It's a really good pick, and I certainly hope the Devils in real life do not get Cole Iserman.
Right. I get why you're saying that.
And then the Sabres selected Carter Yakimchuk, which I thought was another interesting selection that maybe is not the one I would have gone with for them.
Yeah, it's not the one I would have gone, and I'm glad they took him off the board so we didn't have to worry about it.
Yes, exactly. So that's where we are as far as the Locked On NHL mock draft went. So, given all of that, we were looking at the 12th overall pick and thinking, like the top defensemen are now off the board. So, what do we do, right, Russ?
Well, not all the top ones. Anton Silyev is on the board,
That's
and
true.
and so he at 6'7" with his skating and shot blocking and everything, he's an enticing package. And we thought about him, we did.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they and I want to thank all the other Locked On hosts for this. They left us a guy who could be the best center in the draft. If he turns into a center, he could be a first line center. So first line center is going to trump what Anton
Yeah.
Silyev can do, because Silyev's not a one. He's going to be something after that. So that's, Consta Helenius is our guy, and he's played in every tournament this year that you could play in for a young guy, and even the World Championships with the older guys. So tremendous. He had a great year in Liga, tremendous playoffs. His second half really did it, because there were some people in the first half that were like a little iffy, but man, he could be the complete package. He might be a first line center, and I'm happy. I mean, when
Yeah.
you can get a player like this, you take him. You don't even think about it.
Yeah, and I think given the 1C on the Flyers has been so fraught, and
Yep.
even if he turns out to be a 2C in the grand scheme of things, I will take that
Oh yeah.
in a heartbeat, because I just think that that has been such a struggle for the Flyers, and I do think that it would be an incredible opportunity for the Flyers to roll him into the system. You look at what he's been able to accomplish in Liga at such a young age. This season, 36 points in 51 games, and that is pretty solid.
It's really solid. The other thing is the little edge you get here is you don't have to wonder about what to do with him at 19 if he's really tremendous. Like with the CHL, it's like, hey, most of the guys, 99% of the guys, you got to either play them on your team in the NHL or they go back. With him,
More options here.
more options. You could put him in the AHL younger if you want, if you feel like that's his next step, and already start getting used to that and being here in the greater Philadelphia area. That's a big edge. That's a massive
Yeah.
edge.
Yeah, I mean, he's scheduled to play in Liga again next
Right.
year for a different team than he was on this year, because he was on loan. So
Right.
he's going to play with his original club next year.
But he can
But
go right
still,
into the AHL at the end of the season after that.
yeah, yeah, I think that is the key here, is that if he's in the Flyer system, one more year in Liga, come over at the tail end of next season to play with the Phantoms in what's hopefully another playoff run
Right.
for them. And
Yeah, that's
I
what
just
you
think,
hope, and that's a big edge in development. Like you got a leg up in development for that. So I want to thank everybody. I appreciate it. You made the decision fairly easy, but I didn't want to dismiss Silyev because he could really be a tremendous defenseman, and so we'll see if anybody after us takes someone when he gets taken. But he's a prize defenseman still on the board.
yeah, I don't think there would be regrets, even in retrospect, if Silyev turns out to be a phenomenal defenseman, just
No, no.
because this would be the right thing to do for the Flyers at this
Yes.
time.
Yep. No, this is what they need. It's you can't always go best player available. Sometimes you have to go organizational need. But with Helenius, he could actually be both.
Yeah, that's the key here, I think, is that he is both. And I think that, you look also at what he was able to accomplishment accomplished at World Juniors this year with 11 points in those 13 games. He's shown that he can play at high level competition and on the world stage, and I think that is important as well. And I would not be as worried about development and overseeing him because I just think he's already on the right path here.
Yeah, he's already on the right path. And so, yes, one more year overseas is really going to be good for him. And then hopefully he would get over here. And that's a big deal. In real life, if the Flyers had a chance to take him, I'm pretty sure they'd take him, but I don't think he'll be there.
All right. Well, I think the other pick in this mock draft is going to be the more difficult one to make, especially given the million different directions that the second half of the first round picks can go.
Correct.
And we will get to what the other locked on picks were and how it netted out for us in our mock draft coming up next.
We all know how important life insurance is, but it can be overwhelming trying to find the right policy on your own. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. I know it feels so much better to have insurance and not to have to worry about my family being covered. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. And Policy Genius gives you an unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl.
On tomorrow's show, we will be talking Igor Zamula and his season in review. We hinted at that last week, and I'm excited to dig into his season and how he stuck on the roster and really improved over the course of this past
And hopefully
season.
getting that new contract that we've heard about.
Yep, that as well. So last segment, we talked about our pick of Consta Hellenius at 12th overall and where the other teams had picked to lead us there. Well, after we picked, the Minnesota Wild turned around and picked the other guy that we had talked about with Anton Silyev, the
Yep.
defenseman. And we made a calculated risk picking that forward instead of the defenseman, which we just talked about in the first segment in terms of making that tough choice, right?
And the reason we did that is because we still think he could be a number one center. And I don't know if Silyev is a number one. I think he's more of a number two. So we took that gamble. That's the gamble right there.
All right, so continuing on to the 32nd pick, the last pick in the first round. There were a lot of picks in between our 12th overall and the 32nd. So if you're watching this on YouTube, we're putting up all of those picks, but we will talk about some of the key ones that affected our decision here. So I think that, obviously the big one that affected us the most was the Calgary Flames
Oh, yeah.
picking Teddy Stiga at 28th overall because we have been so high on him and talked about him a lot. And I got to say, I was pretty mad at them for snaking him.
Yeah, if you could see me shaking my fist, I'm shaking my fist. I would have taken Teddy Stiga all day long.
Yeah, and we had thought that maybe Cole Hudson would get picked by the Canadiens at 26, but no, the Kings picked
Yeah.
him at 21, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good pick. Speaking to Cole there, I think he's very determined and trying to not be in his brother's shadow, but also say, hey, I do have a lot of his attributes too. So I think the Kings, that's a good spot. Actually, that's a good spot for Cole.
And then EJ Emery, who we talked about earlier in the week quite a bit related to the combine. He was pretty successful physically, went to the Leafs, which just seems like so spot on after the combine.
That actually may be dead on. There's a very good chance that
Yeah.
actually happens.
I know. It just seemed absolutely perfect. I do want to talk about the picks that happened after Teddy Stiga for the Stars, Rangers, and Ducks, because I think them picking Brunicky, Latorno, and Basha, those three picks, that were pretty unusual or unexpected to me for those three.
Yeah, Brunicky is one though. After speaking to him, I do see where he's got a bright future. His offense was just starting to come through this year for the first time, and so there's something there. I don't, Dean Letourneau is a long term guy as we talked about, but he has a lot of ability, and he recently changed some of his plans, so now he's going straight to Boston College. Why is he going straight to Boston College? Because some guys graduated. So,
Yep.
now he's got a bigger chance to have a bigger spot. So that's good for him because he was going to go, if you remember, to the USHL, and then
Yep.
that changed. So Andrew Basha, I like him, and I like him even more after meeting him. He is a kid that is just like a rock solid hockey player. Uh, he almost had a mullet, like it was a curly kind of mullet, and I had that in high school, so I was like, "Good for you, kid." But I really like him. I like his personality, and he is a player. So that's a really good pick too from Anaheim.
All right. So now that that is all said and done, we were in the position of picking last in the first round for the Locked On NHL Mock Draft. And we went with Ryder Ritchie, a forward from the Prince Albert Raiders in the WHL. And we we laughed at ourselves because we did not take a defenseman
Right.
in with either pick, but that's the situation we found ourselves in with somebody who had dropped in Ryder Ritchie significantly from what your rankings were, right, Russ?
Yeah. Yeah. I really have him ranked high. He missed 21 games, and that's significant. But then he did play in some of the key tournaments and did well. And so I think that's an interesting thing. So he was more than a point a game. He had 8 points in 7 games in the U18s, in the U18 Worlds. So that really boded well. And I wasn't the only one that noticed that, trust me. But the fact that he missed games in his draft year, he knew that that hurt him to some degree. And the interesting thing is, so I got to talk to him and asked him exactly about that. That do you feel like you're the most underrated guy in this draft? And he said he paused for a minute because he was thinking what he was gonna, and he goes, "Yeah, you know what? I do." And now I do have a chip on my shoulder. He gave me this look, and I wish I could have told
Love
him, "Hey,
that.
kid, this is why I'm drafting you." I wish I could have said that.
Yeah, I think, especially for the Flyers and when they have two first round picks, their late pick is somebody who tends to be scrappy and have a
Yes,
chip on their shoulder.
yes,
And this is why I love this pick and decided to forego a defenseman. Now, I
right,
think the other reason is that we had talked previously on the show about the defensemen in this draft overall, and that there were several bands of them
yeah,
through in terms of skill level. And this was just in between bands.
yep,
And it just didn't make sense to go with a defenseman because it would be a reach at this point in the draft, given who everybody else had picked already. There just
right.
wasn't somebody in that sweet spot here.
No, I mean there are some decent defensemen that are going to go through 45. Don't get me wrong, and what you're saying is right. But Richie really has a chance to be like a really top notch second
Yeah.
line guy. He kind of has this Travis Konechny kind of personality to him. And that's sort of the vibe I got from his
Yep.
personality, and that's what and I deal with Travis all the time, right? So, like, I could spot it, and yeah, I think you're gonna see this guy next year have a big year because wherever he gets picked, he's not gonna like it.
Yep. Absolutely. So I think,
Not the team, by the
again,
way. I don't mean the team, but what I
right.
mean is the spot that he's in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, while we were bummed out by some of the picks that we couldn't make because of what our colleagues had done, all's fair in the draft, I guess.
Yeah,
And I think we wound up with two very, very good players that could be very, very good for the Flyers moving forward. And I think in a mock draft, that's the best you can ask for.
Yeah, I mean, if Hellenius turns into a 1C, well, that's something that the team would need. And if Richie turns into a second liner, well, Konecny's not playing forever. So even if he starts as a third liner and then moves into that second line when Konecny's eventually gone, that's what you look for. You got to have guys who are ready to replace or close to replacing the other guys.
And Richie is a younger guy. He doesn't turn
Yes.
18 till August, so he has a much further runway, which is
Yes.
good because it give him more time to develop. So
Yeah,
that's
that was a
another
key
thing.
point too. Yeah.
Yeah, that I liked about him as well. But yeah, so that is the Locked On NHL 2024 NHL Mock Draft. Hope you enjoyed that. And we will be back tomorrow talking Egor Zamula and taking your mailbag questions. So make sure you get those in. You can send them to us via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great day, everyone.